Don't miss your blessing from today's guest, Jon Lampley. On that one, we heard Louise Fouché on alto saxophone, Theron Brown on piano, Barry Stevenson on upright bass, and Joe Saylor on drums and tambourine. And a little bit about Jon Lampley. He is the trumpet player for The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, and he's been doing that since 2015. And he's also one of the co-founders of the jazz funk group Huntertones, among so much more. Jon released his debut album Night Service live at Lunatico a year ago. In fact, yesterday was the album's 1 year anniversary. And Jon is joining me today to share a bit about his story so far in the world of gospel, jazz, and professional music. Jon, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very, very excited to be here.
Yeah, man. Well, let's jump straight in. The show's only an hour on a Sunday morning, so let's dive right in. Given your backstory, it seems very fitting that your debut album would be so heavily influenced by your upbringing in church. So why don't we start there? Where did you grow up, and what role did church play in your early life and musical development?
So I grew up in Akron, Ohio, which most people know as the hometown of LeBron James.
Yes, sir.
So, of course, I was grew up playing basketball, grew up watching him play. But one of the foundational things for me was going to church every Sunday at First Apostolic Faith Church on the east side of Akron. And when I was in about sixth or seventh grade, I barely knew how to play the trumpet. And my mom said, you know what, you're going to start playing in the church band. So I showed up with my trumpet. And, the type of church that I grew up in, there's no sheet music, there's
Mhm.
no kind of formality. You just kind of show up and you play. So I was a young kid. And I remember the musicians were kind of looking at me like, all right, well, I guess you're going to play now. And really, over the course of those first couple of years, it was, not only just using my ears to learn how to play in that setting and to learn all of these songs, but also literally learning how to play the instrument through, all right, well, this song is in this key. Those notes sound good. Those ones don't, you know? And
Yeah.
so I would say, my church upbringing was essential twofold to my musicianship. Number one, it's where I learned how to play the instrument, and it's where I learned how to play with other people, how to listen, how to, step up and kind of fill the space when it's time to do that, but also when to lay out and kind of pay attention to what's happening. But the other thing that, the church experience was foundational to me, and I would argue this is more important, is that the type of church that I grew up in, whether it was a pastor or a praise and worship leader, you have to be dialed into what is happening in the room amongst the congregation, with what is happening with the spirit in the room. So, if you're singing a hype song and kind of the spirit is moving in a way towards worship, to know how to shift gears and to settle that down, or
Yeah.
to be able to kind of, read the room, feel the spirit, not only understand what's happening with that, but then use your voice, use your tone to kind of react and guide the service in a way that is necessary. And so from a very young age, I watched, praise leaders, choir directors, the organists, Sister Evelyn Bailey and Wayne Smith do this masterfully. And that kind of became the core of who I wanted to be as a musician, as a performer. Later on, I
Mhm.
started to study jazz and whatnot, but I was always kind of focused on and obsessed with being completely dialed in to the tone of a room and the spirit with which God is moving in that room. And I don't think that's isolated to a church. I think that's happening in any place where music is being made. And to choose to be dialed into that and to kind of let that move through me and to kind of, shift the atmosphere as it needs to be shifted by paying attention to that. And all of that came from, playing in the corner at First App as a kid.
No, that's beautiful, man. And I guess from my own experience, because I play sax and keys as well.
Yeah.
What was the formation of your band usually, and how did the trumpet fit into that?
Great question. So Hammond B3 organ as it is in many Black churches, was kind of the centerfold of the whole band. And we had two organists, Sister Evelyn Bailey, who was kind of would play the more traditional songs, the hymns or the older songs. And then Wayne Smith, Elder Wayne Smith, was the organist who would play kind of the more contemporary music. So they would kind of switch off. There was a pianist, oftentimes her name was Sister Marie Neville. She would play drums, electric bass, guitar. And that was kind of the makeup of our band.
Yeah.
The funny thing about it was like all of those instruments were amplified either through amplifiers or, the Leslie, which is very loud. My instrument was not amplified. And for goodness, 10 to 12 years that I played at church, I never had a microphone.
Yeah.
So, and our church wasn't like a huge mega church, but it wasn't small. I think, probably 400-ish size
Got you.
building. So in order to play and be heard, I really had to like fill it up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I think that also contributed to the way that I play the instrument, is because for so many of the formative years, it was like, well, if you want to be heard, you got to play louder than the amplifier. So go ahead and do that. But that was the makeup of the band at the church.
Beautiful. Okay, so I'm still new in the world of music. So maybe it'll be a little bit more impactful coming from you, and I'll also get to learn something in the process. What role has the church and gospel music played in blues, jazz, and popular music today?
I think you have to go back to kind of remove yourself from the lens of music, and you have to look at the Black experience in America, the foundation of it, which is, slavery. You have this beautiful African culture of communication and music and dance and drumming, and kind of where it's celebratory, but it's also tied to spirituality and faith. Not necessarily Christianity, some not. But then, these people and this wonderful culture are, enslaved, brought over the ocean to this completely foreign land, and brutalized, stripped of their dignity. And the only way that these people had to, survive, make it through, but hold on to a scrap of themselves, ended up being through finding ways to practice those traditions, the traditions of music, the traditions of communal celebration. And so you look at, the original Africans that were here, who were introduced to Christianity through Americans, but then interpreted that book and those, that set of practices through their experience. And so when I look at the Black church, the church that I grew up in, the churches that I grew up seeing, and the culture around it that has influenced me so much, you see people shouting, you see people running, you see people speaking in tongues. The music is incredibly soulful and rhythmically driven, and there's a very specific tonality to it. And that sound is directly tied to a people that have suffered arguably, the most in human history. And so that is the sound of the anguish, but also the sound of the celebration of being able to survive, to create something to hang on to that is so powerful and so strong that it allows you to literally survive that type of situation, and we're talking collectively across generations.
Yeah.
And so what does that sound like? It sounds like the sound of a Hammond B3 organ backing up a preacher. It sounds like a vocalist, singing in a way that is incredibly, raw and guttural. It sounds like, interpreting the word and reading the scripture in a way that sounds like, there's a cadence to it when you think about the end of a preacher in that type of church. And so I think that all of these things over time then became influenced by, the music, black music that was continuing to develop in America. Rhythm and blues, like early on. You listen to an artist like Ray Charles, and it's literally church music, but like with some words about love or love making or being sad about missing somebody. And it's like, as these musics developed, they continue to influence each other. And
Mm-hmm.
something that I feel very over time adamant about, you know, a lot of people say like, oh, well, R&B, all of that is just, you know, it's all church music. Like once gospel developed, the R&B cats were just stealing that. But you got to be careful because it definitely goes both ways. When you
Yeah.
listen to some of the way that hymns started to be interpreted, and especially the way that gospel music started to be written in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, it was going the other way. Whereas, like, man, Andre Crouch to Hezekiah Walker to obviously like somebody like Kirk Franklin, they're taking R&B music and infusing that into the gospel tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And some people get really like, oh, well, it's this way or that way. And I think what's beautiful about it is over time and over generations, it's just become this perfect circle where you see like, you know, the gospel traditions influence R&B and pop music, black pop music. And then that music in turn continues to, you know, influence gospel music. And the last thing I will say is like a lot of people, particularly on the church side of things, take issue when, you know, secular music sounds like church music because it's like, oh, well, this is God's music and you can't be playing with those sounds out in the world. And me personally, and this, I'm just speaking to like what I believe and what I've come to believe. I believe that there is not a I don't believe that there is a world in which you can't have access to this sound or that sound. I
Yeah.
believe that the sound is genuine, and as long as you are acknowledging where it comes from, these sounds should be implemented in whatever music, you know, they make sense to be implemented in, as long as you're acknowledging the source of where those sounds come from. And with my own music, what I find is like the way that I play at a rock concert, you know, I'm playing the same way that I play at church, and people feel that. You know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? I'm not like, let me turn on my rock and roll brain. It's like, let me bring, no, you're fine. Um, I'm not saying, let me turn on my rock and roll brain. I'm saying, let me let this music flow through me honestly, the way that it comes. And people can feel that spirit regardless of whether I'm playing at a church service or at Lunatico or at Red Rocks with a rock band or on the Late Show. And that is kind of that is my thought on how, you know, where the sounds of gospel music and jazz kind of meet and where it all comes from. That
Yeah. No, I love that. And you took up a few questions that I had, so that's perfect. Well, speaking of influences and the intersection of jazz and gospel, you brought in some music for us today, and it's from Sean Jones. So, can you tell us a bit about why this tune stands out for you and what Sean Jones has meant to you?
So Sean has become a friend, which is very surreal. I remember being very young and not knowing anything about jazz, not knowing anything about who was who, but I recognized immediately when I heard somebody and it was like, oh yeah, that's like they're playing the instrument as if they're trying to vocalize and they're playing the language and building the solos and composing in a way that's like they grew up in church. And before I knew anything about anything, I could recognize that. And there were three, there were two trumpet players where I heard them immediately and I was like, oh yeah, that's what you were dealing with. One was Roy Hargrove. The second was Sean Jones. And with Sean, it was even more specific because Sean is also from Northeast Ohio. And
Ah.
so, you know, I heard him play and I was like, man, you're dealing with the sound that's very familiar to me. And it's like, well, he grew up in that. Literally, it's
Mm,
where he's from. And so hearing Sean play at an early age was extremely influential in terms of like, oh, okay, let me figure out how to sing through the horn like that.
yeah.
And I remember, I think I was in college and I had an opportunity to play with him at a jazz festival and stand next to him. And it was just like, this is, like, this is a piece of what I want to get to as an artist, you know? And I think that as an artist, I'm doing a lot different things, writing songs, singing. But as a trumpet player and as a composer, like I'm trying to write and sound and get to the sound that he has kind of gotten to in the way he's able to express himself.
Hmm.
And so the song Forgiveness, I love it because it feels like a hymn. It's very simple. It's a simple progression, and it's a progression that you could kind of trace amongst, different church song. It's not like, oh, that's exactly the changes to Amazing Grace or Tis So Sweet, but it's a very familiar harmony that gets kind of used, and the melody also very similarly, like it has the feeling of those songs of worship and meditation that you listen to in church. And then at the end, when it opens up, it's literally like, the part of the song where the choir's vamping and the soloist is just kind of opening up and letting it rip. He's doing that through the horn. And so this song was one early on that I heard, and I remember I would just listen to it over and over and over again. It's a beautiful song. The way he plays on it is beautiful. And, later on, like on my record, the song As It is like, almost like my version of trying to write a song like this. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's the really cool thing about being an artist, is when you start to create and you start to sit down and write, the music that is deeply in you comes out even when you're not realizing it. And this is one of those songs that has definitely influenced me and has sat with me over the years.
Awesome, man. Well, without ado, here is Forgiveness release from Sean Jones' 2011 Ode to Love. No Need for Fear. On this one, we have Brian Hogan's on alto sax, Lucas Curtis on bass, Obed Calver on drums, Corey Henry on organ, Khalil Kwame Bell on percussion, Orrin Evans on piano, and Sean Jones on trumpet. That was some music from Sean Jones, brought in by our guest for today, Jon Lampley. And John, we spoke about your early life and influences, and you're now living in Brooklyn and have been active in the music scene for, I would presume, over a decade now. You've released numerous albums with Huntertones, Passport being my favorite, although I'm probably a little bit biased because that's when I first discovered you guys. But you decided in 2024 that it was time to step out and release your music under your own name for the first time. So talk to me about that decision. Why now? Why this group of musicians playing this specific music and in this specific space? And that is, of course, the Bar Lunatico.
Man, thanks so much for listening to Passport and
Yeah, of
for checking
course.
out Huntertones. That's much appreciated. Um, I had been somebody who over the course of my life has, in my career, particularly early on, been a part of a lot of bands and kind of added to those bands. Huntertones was like me, Dan, and Chris were kind of the writers, but like Dan really started that band and like Chris was early on. So I came in and I added to that band. OAR, the rock band that I started playing with in 2011, had been a band since 1996. So, I came into the fold and over time, became friends and kind of became a bigger part of those bands. But even with the Late Show band, linking up with John Batiste and that incredible group of musicians, now led by Louis Cato, I was coming into the fold of something that already existed and kind of introducing my sound to it.
Hmm.
And kind of as I became more comfortable and the years go by, kind of being able to be a more kind of integral part of whatever that situation is, creatively writing, kind of, performing. And the first 10 years of my career were pretty much doing this. And I felt very good about that. Was very, very busy touring with, 3 or 4 different bands at a time while playing in the late show. And I think I've learned so much because I've been blessed to work with some of the most incredible artists across many different genres. I mean, somebody like John Batiste, but also OAR, which is a completely different world than that. I got to tour with incredible singer-songwriter Alan Stone for a year. I got to tour with the band Red Barat, which is a band that combines Indian music with go-go and hip-hop. And it's like, not only were these bands and artists creating the music that they were creating at an incredibly high level, but they were all incredibly generous human beings, incredibly kind, incredibly open, incredibly willing to allow me to learn and grow while I was becoming a part of these things. And I'm a big believer that life, we're talking art, but we're also talking just life. That life moves in windows where
Mm-hmm.
there are windows where it is time to do one thing. There are times where it's time to go, go, go. There are times where it's like, all right, I need to rest and chill and regroup and pay attention. There are times where it is time to learn and be a part of different things and give your energy. And then there are times where it's time to kind of like take what you've learned and take the time that you have and create and
Yeah.
really say, what do I want to say? And so after about 10 or 11 years of growing and building other things and learning from other artists that I've gotten to work with, I really felt in 2022 that it was like, okay, now is the time. I have the late show that keeps me in one place for the majority of the year, so I have time to build something. I have the experience. I have created this network of musicians that is amazing and I know would be great for this music. It's just a matter of, you know, the window's open. Now you got to make the opportunity happen.
Yeah.
And so enter Bar Lunatico. One of the first gigs I played when I moved to New York, I play trumpet, but I also play sousaphone. And John Ellis, the amazing saxophonist, asked me if I would play sousaphone in his band Double Wide at Bar Lunatico. The show was great, and it was the first time I was introduced to this space. And we could do a whole conversation specifically on Lunatico, the
Yeah.
history
Yeah.
of it, Richard who runs it, the energy that's there. But I will just say that it is one of the most special places in New York City in that you step in and you don't feel like you're in New York. You feel like you're in this alternate universe. And every night of the week there is music, and it's the most interesting music, the most well-respected musicians across genres. And essentially after playing a couple of shows at Lunatico with John Ellis's band, I introduced, Richard knew me, the guy who runs it, and I was like, "Hey, I have an idea for a project." And this again, the window was open for me. And I was like, it's somewhere between the lines of gospel and jazz. It's a churchy thing. It's not a church thing. I want to do it on Sunday nights. And Richard said, you know what? Let's try it. And I remember I booked the gig and I did not have music. I had, I was like, oh, well, I had the idea,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, okay, well, now the gig is in a month. Let me actually start to put these ideas that are in here. Let me get them out. And so the first one I remember, it was about 60% covers and then 40% some of these original songs.
Yeah.
And what I remember is that just the feeling after the first one of like, wow, I can see exactly what this is going to be, what I want it to be. The time is right. And now it's just time to go. And so over the
Mm-hmm.
course of the next 2 years, I wrote more music. The band solidified into what the band that you see on the record. And I think that the space, like we turn it into this incredible like kind of communal space that it feels a little like church, but it still feels like a bar in Brooklyn. And um over the course of 2 years of building the project, I knew immediately that it was like, all right, this is going to be my first record and it's going to be recorded here. It's not going to be recorded in studio. We're going to set the microphones up and we're going to capture this exactly as it is. The bar, the noises, the audience, all of
Mm-hmm.
that. And um, kind of to the other part of your question, it was really important for me to have the band on this project be musicians that have touched the church, but not church musicians trying to deal with jazz,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
or like jazz musicians that are trying to deal with church.
Yeah.
Because at the heart of who I am, I feel like it's like I am a musician that came out of the church, but also came out of like, you know, public marching band, but also went to school for jazz and was like dealing with that. I wanted the band to be musicians that are out playing jazz, because a lot of the compositions are like, we're tipping, we're swinging, and I wanted to feel like that. But also I wanted it to be musicians that understand not just the musical traditions of church, but more so the culture of it. Like when
Mm-hmm.
I say amen, or if I start to like speak in a certain way, for the piano player to not be scared to play a little something, or for, you know, if a
Yeah.
song is kind of moving, for the band to understand like, oh, okay, well, we're going to shift with that. That was very important to me. And so, you know, Barry on bass, Louis Fouché on alto, Joe Saylor on drums, who also a big part of the band is his proficiency with the tambourine. Like, you know, not only being able to deal with the drum set, but that sound is so specific to the Black church, and having that be a part of the sound of this music has been like absolutely crucial. And then
Mm-hmm.
the other beautiful part about the recording is that the pianist Theron Brown is actually somebody that I've been playing music with in church since I was in like 5th or 6th grade.
No way.
Yeah, so he
Yeah.
grew up in Zanesville, Ohio. My family grew up around his family. He moved to Akron, and I call him like the mayor of Akron, Ohio. He is beloved in that city and in that state. But when I knew I wanted to record, I called him. I was like, "Hey, man, I've been building this project in New York and you know, there's a piano. The piano players here are great, but like, I need you to be on the recording." And
Mm-hmm.
he was down. He flew in, and it's just like the way that he plays and the connection that we have is very, very special. And so that's kind of how this specific album and project came about. And it's very surreal that it's turning a year old, because not only does this album mark my first, you know, solo album, it kind of marks the beginning of a new phase in my career where, yes, while I am still invested in all of these projects that I am a part of, the Late Show Band, Huntertones, OAR, I am now like pouring equal effort and energy into thinking about, what do I have to say and how do I want to say it as an artist in the world, and that being a big part of the next phase of my career. And this is kind of the first step of that.
Yeah, and I'm excited to see it. Sorry about that. Yeah, I was saying I'm really excited to see it. Unfortunately, though, we are getting close to the end of today's show, so I should start to wrap things up. But you were in Toronto last year with the Huntertones, and I really enjoyed every second of that show at the Rex. So, selfish question: when can we expect to see you back in Toronto?
That is a great question. First of all, the Rex is one of my favorite places in the world. The Rex is the first place that Huntertones and myself got to play that was not in America. And everybody there over the course of our, you know, 10, 12 years playing there has been so wonderful. Tom is amazing. Um, I am anticipating that Huntertones will get back to Toronto in 2026, whether it be for the Jazz Festival or just back to the Rex or somebody up there. Nothing's on the books yet, but I imagine that I will be up there with them. And also, in the next year, I am actively working to get my own music, night service, and kind of otherwise out into the world on the weekends that I am free. So fingers crossed there's a way that I can bring night service, or, you know, some iteration of what I'm doing up to Toronto within the next 2 years. But definitely keep an eye out for Huntertones to be making a return trip. All of the shows that I'm playing, I'm, you know, announcing on my socials, but also on my website, jonlampley.com. But Selfishly, I would love to get back to Toronto because it's such a wonderful city, and every single time I've been there, just full of a lot of really wonderful memories, and some memories that no longer exist because, the memories were happening a little too good, but no, I'm very excited to get back to Toronto, and hopefully it is sooner rather than later.
No, I'm looking forward to it, man. And I also heard through the social media grapevine that you may have some new music on the way. Are you able to give us a little teaser of what we can expect and when?
So basically I am in the throes of working on my next solo project, which will be a studio record, much more produced, more songs, more kind of like if night service was this is kind of the live jazz church side of what I'm trying to do. This next record is going to be kind of all of the other or all of the influences kind of wrapped into song form.
Yeah,
Like so
yeah,
a little more boom bap, a little more um bop your head, sing along. But no, I'm singing all over the record. And I don't have too much information, but all I can say is that the album is going to be called Notes to Self, and I am planning on releasing the first music of that album in the summer.
yeah.
And
Okay.
I'm extremely, extremely excited about it.
That is some good news, some good summer news to look forward to. Well, John, thank you so much for joining me today. And to all those tuning in, thank you so much for listening. This has been Take Me to the Water on Jazz FM 91. My name is Jelani Watson, and it has been a pleasure to share this music with you. And I look forward to doing it again next week, same time, same place. But stay tuned because up next we have Jazzology hosted by Heather Bambrick, where you get to learn about some of the up and coming musicians in the GTA. Before we go, John, can you send us off with one more tune? And let me see what I got queued up here. We got On the Sunny Side of the Street. You want to tell me a bit about that?
Absolutely. This was when I first got into studying and listening to jazz. One of the first things I heard was Dizzy's version of this song, and I immediately connected just with the joy and the levity and the beauty of his interpretation, but also just the message of the song. There's always going to be crazy stuff happening in the world, both outwardly and inwardly, but it is a choice every single day to walk on the sunny side of the street. And so this is a song that every show that I do this song, and I'm trying to capture the levity of what Dizzy did in the way that I play it. So
Yeah.
hopefully it gives everybody who's listening a little bit of a lift and some encouragement to focus on the good things today.
Awesome. Here is On the Sunny Side of the Street from Jon Lampley's debut album, Night Service at Lunatico.